gesture. My carry-on item was a parka. In the Olympic Peninsula of northwest Washington state, a small town named Forks exists under a near constant cover of clouds. It rains on this inconsequential town more than any other place in the United States of America. It was from this town and its gloomy, omnipresent shade that my mother escaped with me when I was only a few months old. It was in this town that I'd been compelled to spend a month every summer until I was 14. That was the year I finally put my foot down. These past 3 summers, my dad Charlie vacationed with me in California for 2 weeks instead. It was to Forks that I now exiled myself, an action that took with great horror. I detested Forks. I loved Phoenix. I loved the sun and the blistering heat. I loved the vigorous, sprawling city. Bella, my mum said to me, the last of 1,000 times before I got on the plane, you don't have to do this. My mum looks like me, except with short hair and laugh lines. I felt a spasm of panic as I stared at her wide, childlike eyes. How could I leave my loving, erratic, harebrained mother to fend for herself? Of course she had Phil now, so the bills would probably get paid. There would be food in the refrigerator, gas in her car, and someone to call her when she got lost. But still, I want to go. I lied. I'd always been a bad liar, but I'd been saying this lie so frequently lately that it sounded almost convincing now. Tell Charlie I said hi. I will. I'll see you soon, she insisted. You come home whenever you want. I'll come right back as soon as you need me. room was familiar. It had belonged to me since I was born. The wooden floor, the light blue walls, the peaked ceiling, the yellow lace curtains around the window. These were all part of my childhood. The only changes Charlie had ever made was switching the crib for a bed and adding a desk as I grew. The desk now held a second-hand computer with the phone line for the modem stapled along the floor to the nearest phone jack. This was a stipulation from my mother so that we could stay in touch easily. The rocking chair from my baby days was still in the corner. There was only one small bathroom at the top of the stairs which I would have to share with Charlie. I was trying not to dwell too much on that fact. One of the best things about Charlie is he doesn't bother. He left me alone to unpack and get settled, a fear that would have been altogether impossible for my mother. It was nice to be alone, not to have to smile and look pleased, a relief to stare dejectedly out the window at the sheeting rain and let just a few tears escape. I wasn't in the mood to go on a real crying jag. I would save that for bedtime when I would have to think about the coming morning. Fawkes High School had a frightening total of only 357, now 58 students. There were more than 700 people in my junior class alone back home. All of the kids here had grown together, their grandparents had been toddlers together. I would be the new girl. From the big city, a curiosity, a freak. Maybe if I looked like a girl from Phoenix should. I could work this to my advantage, but physically I'd never fit in anywhere. I should be tan, sporty, blonde, a volleyball player, or a cheerleader perhaps. All the things that go with living in the Valley of the Sun. Instead, I was ivory-skinned without even the excuse of blue eyes or red hair. Despite the constant sunshine, I had always been slender but soft somehow. Obviously not an athlete. I didn't have the necessary hand-eye coordination to play sports without humiliating myself and harming both myself and anyone else who stood too close. When I finished putting my clothes in the old pine dresser, I took my bag of bathroom necessities and went to the communal bathroom to clean myself up after the day of travel. I looked at my face in the mirror as I brushed through my tangled, damp hair. Maybe it was the light, but I already looked sallower, unhealthy. My skin could be pretty. It was very clear, almost translucent looking, but it all depended on colour. I had no colour here. Facing my pallid reflection in the mirror, I was forced to admit that I was lying to myself. It wasn't just physically that I'd never fit in, and if I couldn't find a niche in school with 300 people, what were my chances here? I didn't relate well to people my age. Maybe the truth was that I didn't relate well to people, period. Even my mother, who I was closer to than any else on the planet, was never in harmony with me, never on exactly the same page. Sometimes I wondered if I was seeing the same things through my eyes that the rest institution, I wondered nostalgically, where were the chain link fences, the metal detectors? I parked in front of the first building, which had a small sign over the door reading, Front Office. No one else was parked there, so I was sure it was off limits, but I decided I would get direction instead. Instead of circling around in the rain like an idiot, I stepped unwillingly out of the toasty truck cab and walked down a little stone path lined with dark hedges. I took a deep breath before opening the door. Inside it was brightly lit and warmer than I'd hoped. The office was small, a little waiting area with padded folding chairs, orange flecked commercial carpet, notices and awards cluttering the walls, a big clock ticking loudly. Plants grew everywhere in large plastic pots, as if there wasn't enough greenery outside. The room was cut in half by a long counter cluttered with wire baskets full of papers and brightly coloured flyers. Taped to its front, there were 3 desks behind the counter, one of which was manned by a large, red-haired woman wearing glasses. She was wearing a purple t-shirt, which immediately made me feel overdressed. The red-haired woman looked up. "Can I help you?" "I'm Isabella Swan," I informed her, and saw the immediate awareness light her eyes. I was expected, a topic of gossip no doubt, daughter of the chief's flighty ex-wife come home at last. "Of course," she said. She dug through a precariously stacked pile of documents on her desk until she found the one she was looking for. "I have your schedule right here and a map of the school." She brought several sheets to the counter to show me. She went through my classes for me, highlighting the best route to each on the map, and gave me a slip to have each teacher sign, which I was to bring back at the end of the day. She smiled at me and hoped, like Charlie, that I would like it here in Forks. I smiled back as convincingly as I could. When I went back out to my truck, other students were starting to arrive. I drove around the school, following the line of traffic. I was glad to see that most of the cars were older like mine, nothing flashy. At home, I'd lived in one of the few lower income neighbourhoods that was included in Paradise Valley District. It was a common thing to see a new Mercedes or a Porsche in the student lot. The nicest car here was a shiny Volvo, and it stood out. Still, I cut the engine as soon as I was in the spot so that the thunderous volume wouldn't draw attention to me. I looked at the map in the truck, trying to memorise it now. Hopefully I wouldn't have to walk around with it stuck in front of my nose all day. I stuffed everything in my bag, slung the strap over my shoulder and sucked in a huge breath. "I can do this," I lied to myself feebly. No one was going to bite me. I finally exhaled and stepped out of the truck. I kept my face pulled back into my hood as I walked the sidewalk, crowded with teenagers. My plain black jacket didn't stand out, I noticed with relief. Once I got around the cafeteria building, 3 was easy to spot. A large black 3 was painted on a white square on the east corner. I felt my breathing gradually creeping towards hyperventilation as I approached the door. I tried holding my breath as I followed 2 unisex raincoats through the door. The classroom was small. The people in front of me stopped just inside the door to hang up their coats on a long row of hooks. I copied them. They were 2 girls, one a porcelain-coloured blonde, the other also pale with light brown hair. At least my skin wouldn't be a standout here. I took the slip up to the teacher, a tall, balding man whose desk had a nameplate identifying him as Mr. Mason. He gawked at me when he saw my name, not an encouraging response, and of course I flushed tomato red, but at least he sent me to an empty desk at the back without introducing me to the class. It was harder for my new classmates to stare at me in the back, but somehow they managed. I kept my eyes down on the reading list the teacher had given me classes together. He sounded hopeful. I smiled at him vaguely and went inside. The rest of the morning passed in about the same fashion. My trigonometry teacher, Miss Stephenie, who I would have hated anyway, just because of the subject he taught, was the only one who made me stand in front of the class and introduce myself. I stammered, blushed, and tripped over my own boots on the way to my seat. After 2 classes, I started to recognise several of the faces in each class. There was always someone braver than the others who would introduce themselves and ask me questions about how I was liking forks. I tried to be diplomatic, but mostly I just lied a lot. At least I never needed the map. One girl sat next to me in both trig and Spanish, and she walked with me to the cafeteria for lunch. She was tiny, several inches shorter than me, 5 feet 4. Several inches shorter than my 5 feet 4 inches, but her wildly curly dark hair made up for a lot of the difference between our heights. I couldn't remember her name, so I smiled and nodded as she prattled about teachers and classes. I didn't try to keep up. We sat at the end of a full table with several of her friends who she introduced to me. I forgot all their names as soon as she spoke to them. They seemed impressed by her bravery in speaking to me. The boy from English, Eric, waved at me from across the room. It was there, sitting in the lunchroom and trying to make a conversation with 7 curious strangers, that I first saw them. They were sitting in the corner of the cafeteria, as far away from where I sat as possible in the long room. There were 5 of them. They weren't talking and they weren't eating, though each had a tray of untouched food in front of them. They weren't gawking at me, unlike most of the other students, so it was safe to stare at them without fear of meeting an excessively interested pair of eyes. But it was none of these things that caught and held my attention. They didn't look anything alike. Of the 3 boys, one was big, muscled, like a serious weightlifter with dark, curly hair. Another was taller, leaner, but still muscular and honey blonde. The last was lanky, less bulky, with untidy bronze-coloured hair. He was more boyish than the others, who looked like they could be in college, or even teachers here rather than students. The girls were opposite. The tall one was statuesque. She had a beautiful figure, the kind you saw on the cover of the Sports Illustrated swimsuit issue, the kind that made every girl around her take a hit on her self-esteem just by being in the same room. Her hair was golden, gently waving to the middle of her back. The short girl was pixie-like, thin in the extreme, with small features. Her hair was deep black, cropped short and pointed in every direction, and yet they were all exactly alike. Every one of them was chalky pale, the palest of all the students living in this sunless town, paler than me, the albino. They all had very dark eyes despite the range in hair tones. They also had dark shadows under their eyes, purplish, bruise-like shadows, as if they were all suffering from a sleepless night or almost done recovering from a broken nose. Though their noses, all their features were straight, perfect, angular, but all this is not why I couldn't look away. I stared because their faces, so different, so similar, were all devastatingly, inhumanly beautiful. Maybe the perfect blonde girl or the bronze-haired boy. They were all looking away from each other, away from the other students, away from anything in particular as far as I could tell, as I watched the small girl rose with her tray, unopened soda, unbitten apple, and walked away with a quick, graceful lope that belonged on a runway. I watched, amazed at her little dancer's step, till she dumped her tray and glided through the back door, faster than I would have thought possible. My eyes darted back to the others who sat unchanging. Who are they? I asked the girl from my Spanish class whose name I'd forgotten. As she looked up to see who I meant, though already knowing, probably from my tone. Suddenly, he looked at her, the thinner one, the boyish one, the youngest perhaps. He looked at my neighbour for just a fraction of a second. Jasper Hale. The one who left was Alice Cullen. They all lived together with Dr. Cullen and his wife. She said this under her breath. I glanced sideways at the beautiful boy who was looking at his tray now, picking a bagel to pieces with long, pale fingers. His mouth was moving very quickly, his perfect lips barely opening. The other three still looked away, and yet I felt he was speaking quietly to them. Strange, unpopular names, I thought. The kinds of names grandparents had, but maybe that was in vogue here. Small town names. I finally remembered that my neighbour was called Jessica, a perfectly common name. There were 2 girls named Jessica in my history class back home. They are very nice looking. I struggled with the conspicuous understatement. Yes, Jessica agreed with another giggle. They're all together though. Emma and Rosalie, and Jasper and Alice, I mean. And they live together. Her voice held all the shock and condemnation of the small town. I thought critically, but it was being honest. I had to admit that even in Phoenix, it would cause gossip. Which ones are the Cullens? I asked. They don't look related. Oh, they're not. Dr. Cullen is really young, in his 20s or early 30s. They're all adopted. The Hales are brother and sister, twins. The blondes, they're foster children. They look a little older for foster children. They are now. Jasper and Rosalie are both 18, but they've been with Mrs. Cullen since they were 8. She's their aunt or something like that. That's really kind of nice for them to take care of all those kids like that when they're so young and everything. I guess so, Jessica admitted reluctantly, and I got the impression that she didn't like the doctor and his wife for some reason. With the glances she was throwing at their adopted children, I would presume the reason was jealousy. I think that Mrs. Cullen can't have any kids though, she added, as if that lessened kindness. Throughout all this conversation, my eyes flickered again and again to the table where the strange family sat. They continued to look at the walls and not eat. Have they always lived in Forks? I asked. Surely I would have noticed them on one of my summers here. No, she said in a voice that implied it would be obvious. Even to a new arrival like me, they just moved down 2 years ago from somewhere in Alaska. I felt a surge of pity and relief. Pity because as beautiful as they were outsiders, clearly not accepted. Relief that I wasn't the only newcomer here, and certainly not the most interested by any standard. As I examined them, the youngest one of the Cullens looked up and met my gaze, this time with evident curiosity in his expression. As I looked swiftly away, it seemed to me that his glance held some kind of unmet expectation. Which one is the boy with the reddish-brown hair? I asked. I peeked at him from the corner of my eye, and he was still staring at me, but not gawking like the other students of today. He had a slightly frustrated expression. I looked down again. That's Edward. He's gorgeous, of course, but don't waste your time. He doesn't date. Apparently none of the girls here are good enough for him. She sniffed a clear case of sour grapes. I wondered when he turned it down. I bit my lip to hide my smile, then I glanced at him again. His face was turned away, but I thought his cheek appeared lifted as if he was smiling too. After a few more minutes, the 4 of them left the table together. They all were noticeably graceful, even the big, brawny one. It was unsettling to watch. The one named Edward didn't look at me again. I sat at the table with Jessica and her friends longer than I would have if I'd been sitting alone. I was anxious not to be late for class on my signed my slip and handed me a book with no nonsense about introductions. I could tell we were going to get along. Of course, he had no choice but to send me to the one open seat in the middle of the room. I kept my eyes down as I went to sit by him, bewildered by the antagonistic stare he'd given me. I didn't look up as I set my book on the table and took my seat, but I saw his posture change from the corner of my eye. He was leaning away from me, sitting on the extreme edge of his chair and averting his face like he smelled something bad. Inconspicuously, I sniffed my hair. It smelled like strawberries, the scent of my favourite shampoo. It seemed an innocent enough odour. I let my hair fall over my right shoulder, making a dark curtain between us, and I tried to pay attention to the teacher. Unfortunately, the lecture was on cellular anatomy, something I'd already studied. I took notes carefully anyway, always looking down. I couldn't stop myself from peeking occasionally through the screen of my hair at the strange boy next to me. During the whole class, he never relaxed his stiff position at the edge of his seat, sitting as far from me as possible. I could see his hand on his left leg was clenched into a fist, tendons standing out under his pale skin. This, too, he never relaxed. He had the long sleeves of his white shirt pushed up to his elbows, and his forearm was surprisingly hard and muscular beneath his light skin. He wasn't nearly as slight as he'd looked next to his burly brother. The class seemed to drag on longer than the others. Was it because the day was finally coming to a close, or because I was waiting for his tight fist to loosen? It never did. He continued to sit so still it looked like he wasn't breathing. What was wrong with him? Was this his normal behaviour? I questioned my judgment on Jessica's bitterness at lunch today. Maybe she was not as resentful as I thought. It couldn't have anything to do with me. He didn't know me from Eve. I peeked up at him one more time and regretted it. He was glaring down at me again, his black eyes full of revulsion as I flinched away from him, shrinking against my chair. The phrase, if looks could kill, suddenly ran through my mind. At that moment, the bell rang loudly, making me jump, and Edward Cullen was out of his seat. Fluidly, he rose. He was much taller than I thought. His back to me, and he was out the door before anyone else was out of their seat. I sat frozen in my seat, staring blankly after him. He was so mean. It wasn't fair. I began gathering up my things slowly, trying to block the anger that filled me. For fear my eyes would tear up. For some reason, my temper was hardwired to my tear ducts. I usually cried when I was angry, a humiliated tendency. "Aren't you Isabella Swan?" a male voice asked. I looked up to see a cute, baby-faced boy, his pale blonde hair carefully gelled into orderly spikes, smiling at me in a friendly way. He obviously didn't think I smelled bad. "Bella," I corrected him with a smile. "I'm Mike." "Hi, Mike. Do you need any help finding your next class? I'm headed to the gym, actually. I think I can find it." "That's my next class too." He seemed thrilled, though it wasn't that big of a coincidence in a school this small. He walked to class together. He was a chatterer. He supplied most of the conversation, which made it easy for me. He'd lived in California till he was 10, so he knew how I felt about the sun. It turned out he was in my English class also. He was the nicest person I'd met today, but as we were entering the gym, he asked, "So, did you stab Edward Cullen with a pencil or what?" I'd never seen him act like that. I cringed, so I wasn't the only one who had noticed, and apparently that wasn't Edward Cullen's usual behaviour. I was strong and colder. I wrapped my arms around myself when I walked into the warm office. I almost turned around and walked back out. Edward Cullen stood at the desk in front of me. I recognised him again. That tousled bronze hair. He didn't appear to notice the sound of my entrance. I stood pressed against the back wall, waiting for the receptionist to be free. He was arguing with her in a low, attractive voice. I quickly picked up the gist of the argument. He was trying to trade from 6th hour biology to another time, any other time. I just couldn't believe that this was about me. It had to be something else, something that happened before I entered the biology room. The look in his face must have been about another aggravation entirely. It was impossible to think that this stranger could take such a sudden, intense dislike to me. The door opened again and the cold wind suddenly gusted through the room, rustling the papers to the desk and swirling my hair around my face. The girl who came in merely stepped to the desk, placed a note in the wire basket and walked out again. But Edward Cullen's back stiffened and he turned slowly to glare at me. His face was absurdly handsome, with piercing, hate-filled eyes. For an instant I felt a thrill of genuine fear, raising the hair on my arms. The look only lasted a second.